Your Creative Push, episode 136.
You will feel forever dissatisfied, and you kind of have to be grateful for it because the dissatisfaction drives you to continue to grow.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is J.A.W. Cooper. Cooper is a talented artist who was born in England, but was raised all over the globe in countries such as Ireland, Sweden, and Kenya. She currently lives in Los Angeles, California, where she creates her fine art and works as a freelance art director for print, motion, and advertising companies, a print designer for fashion companies, and an illustrator for advertising. And Cooper, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And before we get into kind of how you balance all of those things, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about your personal work and what inspires it, because your subject matter is always awesome and really fascinates me. It's like a combination of the beauty of nature with like kind of the grotesqueness of it. So I was wondering, like, where did that come from? Did it come from like the places you lived or what?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here.
Of course.
I think you kind of nailed it. It's the beauty of nature mixed with the grotesqueness of nature sometimes, and there's definitely an element in it that's kind of my analysis, of, I guess, of death or suffering, and there's two sides to everything. Death is inevitable. We're all going to die, but it's terrifying. We don't know what's going to happen, and it's definitely a part of nature. Everything lives and dies, and that cyclical nature definitely is a huge source of inspiration to me. The flip side of beauty and grotesqueness is a huge point of inspiration.
And about how long did it take you? Were you always kind of drawing like that with your personal stuff, or did it take a while to develop that style?
From a pretty early age, I was mostly interested in more scientific illustration, and I think that intense interest in the sort of mechanism of how nature works, or that fascination with nature as from the scientific illustration standpoint, because that's what my mother did quite a bit of, definitely led into more surreal, abstract representations of some of those ideas. So I'd say probably in high school I was already drawing in a surreal way, but I was still working on my skill level. So it took a while for my skill level to get to a point where I could communicate the more abstract, surreal ideas that I had kind of in my mind.
I love it. And let's go back even further then to like one of your first creative moments. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, absolutely. So my parents are both biologists. They're ecologists, freshwater ecologists.
Which I think is so cool.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And that was why we traveled Kenya, Sweden, Ireland. It was professor exchanges, sabbaticals, and also research. And we would have special access to some areas like in Kenya. So it was really a wonderful way to grow up. But I remember we spent a summer at SNARL, which is the Sierra Nevada Aquatic Research Laboratory. And there wasn't a whole lot to do there because my sister and I were just in the dorms. We were young. I was probably 6 and she was 4. I remember, you have to occupy yourself. And I took a piece of paper and folded it into 6 sections. So it was sort of a grid. And I just decided I'm going to get really good at drawing a cat. And that was the first time I thought of the concept of repetition in order to get better. So I would draw a cat, and then I'd look at it and say, the feet are funny, or the toes aren't right. And then I'd redraw it. And it became an obsession. And it was one of those things, I think children pick up a lot of hobbies and stuff, but this one just stuck. And I just kept doing it. And I became obsessed with the idea of growth, because even as a young child, you do something enough, even within a day, you get better and you become hooked on that. So that was for sure my very earliest, what I count as my very earliest point where I was like, this is something I'm extremely interested in getting better at.
Well, I have to say that your cats are amazing now. Well, they show up a lot, but they're really good. And I think that's such a good lesson, such a good story, because I think a lot of times people, if they don't have that kind of instilled in them, like that, just doing it over and over again will get you better at it. Sometimes get frustrated when they try something and it doesn't work
Absolutely.
right away. You know, it's not perfect.
It can seem very daunting. And I think as a young child looking at my mother's illustrations, which were so, her illustrations are much more scientific. They tend to be, insects in almost orthographic diagram type style, but she would also do beautiful illustrations of foxes and stuff. And I would look at it and it seems like magic to an outsider. It seems like you're making something out of nothing. So to make the link between, if I do this enough, I can reach that. It isn't just something that you can or can't do. It's something that anyone can do with enough practice and repetition was an idea that I loved. I loved that concept.
And what about for any adult really, like when you get older and you don't have that same type of like childlike determination like we're talking about, and it's tough, and it's really tough to be bad at something when you start out at like a new hobby or you need to get better in a certain area. Do you have any advice for somebody that doesn't have that determination that we're talking about, that is afraid to suck at something?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's so much harder. As a child, you're expected to be crappy at things, it's fine. You're just a kid. To start really young at something, to get those shitty drawings out of the way early, you have a head start. So then to start later on, and to feel like you're so behind, you then comparing yourself to people of your own age, when really you have to compare yourself to people who have done the same amount of work in that particular direction that you have. So it's so disheartening, I think. Starting out, you feel like, I guess I just can't do this. But that's not true at all. And I think ultimately, my main point of inspiration in this podcast that I had written down was it's okay to feel like your work isn't living up to your expectations. And it's okay to feel the fear that you're a big phony and everyone's going to find out. It's okay to feel dissatisfied, because dissatisfaction is a factor of you knowing that you have a greater potential and you're just not quite reaching it. So in essence, it's very uncomfortable, but for your whole career, you will feel forever dissatisfied, and you kind of have to be grateful for it, because the dissatisfaction drives you to continue to grow. The moment that you're just happy with your work is the moment you stagnate. That's the moment you stop learning and pushing. So you almost never want to feel pleased and satisfied.
Yeah, exactly. Once you get to that point, you're just at a plateau, and it's like you're never going to improve, and in fact you might even get worse and worse.
Absolutely. That's the core of entitlement. And I think that young artists who start out good but then don't push through to something better, who feel that they're just good enough and they're entitled to everything, and they're like, hey, look at my work, and everyone, their parents tell them they're the best, and it's almost a curse to feel like you're so good so early. And if you feel like you aren't good and you're dissatisfied with your work, it will serve your work so much better, even though it's uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And you're like, oh, look how good I am. And it's like, well, actually, yeah, but you did that same exact drawing 5 years ago. Exactly. Do something different, shake it up. So are there any things that kind of like resistances that you have that hold you back, maybe earlier in your career, and maybe that still exists today?
Absolutely. I'd say the number one is fear. It's the most paralyzing aspect of what I do, but it's also one of the strongest motivations that it pushes me to continue to make and draw and paint. And fear is tough, and it's kind of like goes hand in hand with dissatisfaction and being very vulnerable. You put all this work out there, and then it's you have to put it out into the public if you want to continue to gain exposure and visibility. So you're putting out something that's very personal and in a way encouraging people to interact with it, and can be very scary and terrifying. It can also be so rewarding. I'd say with fear, that constant dissatisfaction, that fear that you're just not good enough and your work isn't living up to your expectations. It's this constant balance between it being almost too much, too paralyzing and overwhelming, where you're afraid to start anything, or you don't want it so low that, again, you stop pushing, or you become complacent. So the main way that I get through fear is just to keep making work, and to keep challenging myself to make different work, because I think that that thing that we all chase as creatives is that sensation of growth, and that sensation of growth will never. There's no end to it. It's very much the journey, not the destination. Because no matter how good you get, you'll always hopefully see a point in the past where you are that's greater than. So with fear, just continuing to make a lot of work, continuing to produce and push through despite the potential of paralyzing fear is how I managed to get work done.
Yeah, exactly. It's like this, like that grid example that you talked about before, folding the paper, but assuming that like there's no final like segment of that grid, and it's whenever you're scared of, getting to that later part of the grid where you're, really putting yourself out there, it's always helpful to look back and see how far you've come and to see how much of yourself that you've, been able to put out since that first cat drawing.
Absolutely. It's wherever you are in your work, you're part of a continuum. So there's all the work that came before, and there's all the work that's still going to come. And I think that's a great example. It's like a never-ending grid.
Yeah, I love it. It's a never-ending grid. Oh, man. Yeah, and going back to, just talking about the fear a little bit, because I think everybody has that. And especially if you don't have that, I think that you're not putting enough of yourself into it, because that's where the fear comes from. It's from, making the art a part of you, and then hopefully having that work be accepted or liked. And, I don't know, I think that's one of the scariest things is to do that. But it's just like, if you're not satisfied perfectly with your work and you're not advancing or feeling like you're advanced, I think it's the same thing. If you don't feel that fear, I don't think you're putting enough of yourself into it.
Very true. Yeah, I think so much the best work that we do comes from a place of authenticity and vulnerability. And even I think it is a bit of an exercise to divorce yourself from the feeling that you constantly need outside validation. But even from your own inner validation, you'll never get perfect acceptance. The only thing that you can really be proud of are the steps, the differences between one piece and the next. The little points of improvement, but there's never a final perfect piece.
So would you have any tips then for people to get over that kind of fear, aside from, just kind of just holding your breath and clicking submit and putting it online and just putting yourself out there? Do you have any other tips?
Absolutely. So my biggest tip, and it helps me, it continues to help me a lot, but it helped me so much, particularly in high school when I was just starting to come around to the idea that maybe I would pursue art rather than zoology, which was previously what I wanted to do, is to keep a journal and to keep a very specific type of journal. It's like a mix of a sketchbook, and it's also a place where you can paste in the work of artists that you love, and you can analyze them for what makes their work resonate with you and maybe what doesn't resonate with you about their work. Paste in your own pieces and analyze them. Get really good at analyzing the work of others. And what happens when you do this as practice, like you continue to do it, is that you start to see patterns emerge that you weren't even aware of. So you'll start to see, oh, I think I'm really resonating with people who put a lot of layers into their work, or have a lot of texture, who are very painterly, or who are very illustrative and line-based. You'll start to see the patterns. And what that does is it makes it so that your work isn't derivative of the artist you're inspired by. You're able to distill the deeper thing about their work that resonates with you, and then pull that into your own work.
That's really smart. Yeah. It's like a self-analysis.
Yes, exactly. And that's useful too, because then you're just in the habit of creating a vocabulary to talk almost to yourself about your work and what's working and what isn't.
Yeah, I love that, especially if you don't have artist friends or supportive people that, like we were talking about before, where your parents are like, oh, that's wonderful.
Right.
The people that you surround yourself are always looking to support you,
right.
Hopefully, but they can't necessarily have a conversation about it. So I think that's really important to be able to have that kind of a dialogue with yourself, and I guess, take yourself away from the work enough where you're still putting yourself into the work, but you can still be critical of it.
Yes, so you can step back at the end and say, where can I go from here? Instead of just being like, I'm not happy with it and I don't know why. Because that happens to me all the time. I think it happens to everyone. Like, why isn't this working, or this body of work? Why am I dissatisfied? You can take a step back and say, instead of just being frustrated, how can I use how can I use this to learn for the next piece?
I love it. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the other things that, like, you do so much, like, you have all your personal work, and I think a lot of people don't realize how much, like, freelance work you do that we mentioned at the top of the show. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering how you balance those things and make the separation between, like, work and, you know, your passion projects.
Yeah, that's very true. So almost none of my commercial work is really online. It's all NDC, and also it's not very representational of what I do for my personal work. So it's not worth putting up. But I think that balance is so important, particularly to my life and to a lot of people's lives, when they're balancing sort of the way they make money with their passion. And balance is, it's kind of like the greater analogy of work in general. There's no end point. It's a constantly moving target based on all the variables in your life. Sometimes you have greater financial pressures. Sometimes you have less. Sometimes you have more freedom with your free time. Sometimes you have less. If you have a family, that will affect it too. So I think for me, it's a constantly moving target, and I try to hit it by, first and foremost, if you decide to make something your career, what you're doing is committing to pay your bills with that skill set. So it's not a very romantic way to think about illustration as a career, you know. Right. I think, like, your foremost responsibility is to expect it to pay you enough to not only live on, but to thrive. It should be a career, not just a hobby. If it is also a hobby, if you have two parts to your life that are different, like the way I do, I have my commercial work, which pays the bills. I have my personal projects, which I on purpose almost make a hobby, in that I don't want to have financial pressures affect the decisions I make about that body of work. So I separate them quite distinctly. And that's part of how I do the balance. Is my commercial work is tangential, and I definitely gain a lot as far as visual sensitivity and creative stimulation that I then pull into my personal work, but it doesn't drain from the same pool of energy that my creative work has either. So when I come home, I am not totally wiped. I happen to be in a pretty flexible situation because I'm a freelancer. So I only will work maybe 10 days a month commercially, and the rest of the time I have off. And I understand not everyone has that freedom. And I have so much respect for people who are able to do full-time work and come home and still paint. And it's just a matter of discipline. But also it is genuinely exhausting. And if you're doing that, you're amazing. You should know that.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, a lot of people listening do that. And I think you bring up a really good point too, because, like, for me, I always talk about how, like, cause I deal poker for a living, and I always talk about how that's, like, not creative at all. But sometimes I think that could actually be a blessing, cause I think if I had a job that was, had anything to do with writing where I couldn't express myself creatively and be honest and open, like if I was a copywriter or something, I think it would make me hate writing in general. And I would never want, like, cause I used to play poker a lot, and now I hate playing poker because it's just like I do it all day. Yeah. So I think sometimes that could actually be a blessing, because then when you do get home, you do have, even though you're burnt out physically, you might still have that creative kind of spark to get to work, and I think that can be helpful.
Yes, and I think everyone's different. So some people need to have that element of creativity or some tangential connection to what their passion is in their commercial work. And some people, it is just so draining. And I think it's very person to person. And I am somewhere in the middle too. I do not enjoy commissions, for example. I don't enjoy being told what to do with my more personal work, but I really do enjoy my ad work, because I'm still drawing, you know, I'll do sketches to mock up maybe what a billboard will look like, but it doesn't, I'm able to divorce myself from it. And so, like you're saying, it doesn't pull from my well quite the same.
Right. Yeah, it's really important. And I think that's pretty inspiring too.
Yeah.
How about, like, on a daily basis with balancing your time, as far as, like, getting the personal work done? Do you have, like, any tips for that? Do you kind of just sit down and get to work and just kind of lose yourself, or do you have to actually, like, kind of plan it out?
I do a little bit of both. And day to day can be quite different. Some people, I've heard of artists who they wake up at 8 and they immediately go to the studio and they paint all day and they come home at 10. You know, they're very structured and disciplined. And I think I'm moving toward something closer to that. But right now, my life is quite all over the place as far as day to day. On days that I work commercially, it's pretty much just wake up, go to work, come home, and then I'm usually pretty tired and maybe I'll sketch. But that's 10 days of the month. So for the rest of the time, I stay busy by having external deadlines because I think, especially for painting, like I'll draw every day without any outside pressure, but for painting, I need outside deadlines or I just won't start. So I do a lot of like solo shows, gallery shows, and I do it for personal fulfillment and for exposure and all that stuff, but also because I need that external deadline. And I just know that about myself. Again, I think it's so different person to person, but I'll usually have a to-do list for the day and I don't usually finish it. I don't usually get to everything, but at least having it so that I know all the things that I should be working on definitely helps. And then past that, the external deadlines force me to have stuff done, by a certain date.
Yeah, self-imposed deadlines are definitely very, very important and sometimes hard to keep up with. So yeah, maybe making sure that you, I don't know, have like a schedule of submitting your stuff online if you don't have shows and stuff like that yet, would be helpful. Cause then it's like, I know for the podcast, I probably, would take my time getting it done if I had like one a month or something like that. But that's why I really liked making it, multiple times per week because it just keeps me disciplined to do it.
Absolutely. And then you're accountable to your audience. So even if you don't have shows and you're just posting online, but you're like posting every day, you will start to feel, if you miss a day, you start to feel like, ooh, you start to feel the twinge that you should be getting back to work. So however you keep yourself accountable, I think it's so helpful.
Absolutely. Cooper, what does your art and creativity bring to your life?
Well, it certainly brings a lot of personal satisfaction. It's very cathartic. My personal work is ultimately pretty autobiographical, so it's very surreal. But for me, there's usually two meanings. There's usually like the surreal, big, relatable concept that's more like something that all of humanity can relate to. But then there's usually some anchor point that's my personal motivation for doing the piece, something that I've experienced or that I'm going through. So there's definitely this cathartic, release that is really lovely about it. And then for my commercial work, it allows me the flexibility to sort of craft my life and the balance of my life in a way that suits me depending on whatever variables are happening in my life. So between those two things, I mean, it's I didn't imagine it would be so wonderful. Going into it, I thought, because I wanted to do zoology, I kind of viewed art as self-serving and I really didn't want to be dependent on anyone. I thought it was kind of a selfish career or something. As a child, I just didn't realize that you could make a career out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. I'm so glad that you did find this wonderful, path and that you're down it because your art is amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Of course. And before we get to the final push, I don't know, did you have a favorite book or YouTube clip or anything else that you draw inspiration from?
I do. I actually love to listen to Alan Watts recordings.
Oh, yeah.
Alan Watts, specifically his lectures, because you can read his books and they're fascinating, but they're almost so dense you can fall into them. But his recordings, he has such this beautiful laugh and this beautiful sense of humor that the pretty complex things that he's talking about are a little bit easier to understand when you hear him speak about them. So just to catch everyone up, Alan Watts is a British philosopher, or was a British philosopher, writer, and speaker about Eastern philosophy. And I'm not religious, but I love his alternate ways of perceiving reality, and perception, shifts depending on how we choose to perceive reality. So it's not magic, but it can have an inherently profound change on the way that we experience reality, just to question how we're perceiving things. So I'll have about 24 hours worth of his recordings on tape, and I'll just listen to them on road trips or anytime I need to sort of center myself back to, I don't know, get some perspective about how crazy sometimes that this line of business can be. And then I love camping. So that's another source of inspiration. And I'll go camping about once a month, usually alone, and just get out into nature and hike and feel undefined by anything. So those are my two big sources of inspiration.
I love it. Yeah, I love Alan Watts, and it's the best voice ever too.
Oh, yes.
And that's just why I like podcasts and audio material, because you can, like listen on a drive, but it also, to be able to hear somebody's voice and hear them explain it in certain ways, it just makes it so much easier to digest and makes more fun than sitting down and reading. So I definitely, I highly recommend him and Terrence McKenna. I love listening to the two of them. They're the best.
Such a lovely sense of humor too. I think the idea that life can be a game is just a beautiful idea. It doesn't have to be so serious, even when it's serious.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just like you said, you're not, necessarily religious, but just thinking about that kind of stuff can just put you in a different, existence almost, just to be constantly thinking about the craziness that this world is just really important to do.
I totally agree.
Oh, man. Yeah, unfortunately, it's time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best advice and push them to pursue their creative passion.
Well, we've already touched on it a bit, but I think it's so important to know that it's okay to feel like your work isn't living up to your expectations. It's okay to feel like the fear that you're not good enough. And I think the trick is to use that, to harness those really uncomfortable feelings toward making your work better, toward growth, to keep pushing, to keep making stuff, even if you've got a full-time job that's completely unrelated, to come home and just do a little bit every day just to start things is such a huge step in progress. Dissatisfaction is just a sign that you have much greater potential. And as long as you just keep pushing toward, something greater, that those little moments of growth are just so rewarding.
Yep. Keep going down that endless grid.
Yep. Keep going down that endless grid.
I love it. Oh, man. Cooper, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And you can find Cooper on her website, which is jawcooper.com. On Instagram, she is J.A.W. Cooper. And she is on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, everything else, right?
Yes,
just search for
all the things. Just search for J.A.W. Cooper. You can search under my email, jawcooper@gmail.com. You'll find me most places. Yeah. I have a list of galleries in Los Angeles that support emerging artists. And, if you just email me at jawcooper@gmail.com, I'll be happy to send you this list. It's maybe 10 galleries. And then there's notes too about the type of art they post. Just anyone who wants to get a foot in the door in the gallery scene in Los Angeles is super welcome to email me.
Oh, cool. Excellent. And we'll have all those links, if you don't feel like searching, at yourcreativepush.com/Cooper. And that's it. Thank you so much for coming on the show again.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
So awesome. Had so much fun talking to Cooper. It was really inspirational, and I have become quickly obsessed with this idea of an never-ending grid. And each thing that you do, each drawing that you do, each story that you write, each song that you write is just a piece of that grid. And there's pieces before it, everything you've done before it, and there's pieces that are going to come after it. But to see it on this continuum, I think, is really motivating, because it just shows you that you're kind of on this never-ending journey. And that goes back to this idea of always being dissatisfied with your work that Cooper brought up. And I think she eloquently illustrated why this is important, but I just want to really drive it home, because I think it's really important, because I think that if you are dissatisfied with your work almost constantly, I think that's an awesome thing. That's a really good sign that you are doing the right thing, because you'll be able to constantly grow and to constantly figure out what it is that you want to create. And that's why it's so important to look back on the never-ending grid to see, that one point where it started, to see the improvement that you've made since then. And maybe even, like she said, keep a journal of your goals too, and make short-term goals, so that when you reach a point on this never-ending grid, you can say, okay, I've met these goals. I've improved in this area. I've been able to sell a certain amount of work. I've been able to make a certain amount of money. I've been able to change a certain amount of lives. Whatever it is that your goal is, as you go through this journey, as you go through this never-ending grid, you're going to be a part of that continuum. You're going to be a part of that constantly moving target like Cooper was talking about. And as you're going along that journey, you might become numb to the progress that you've made because it's been baby steps. It's been small improvements. And since you're always dissatisfied, you won't necessarily be happy with the fact that you have completely reached your goals from a year ago. But that's why it's so important to look back and to see the progress and to continue to make goals along this never-ending grid. Never-ending grid. I just had to say it one more time. That's all I've got for you today. Thanks again to J.A.W. Cooper for coming on the show and really giving a really powerful episode. I feel so inspired just listening back to it, and I can't wait for you all to hopefully be inspired by it as well. So hopefully you are ready to go and get your work done and take one more step on the never-ending grid. So please go and get your work done, and we will be here for you on Friday with another episode if you need the push again. But until then, go do some awesome work and be satisfied with your dissatisfaction, because that's how you know you're on the right path. I love y'all, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.